Good afternoon. On behalf of the students, faculty, and administration here at Utah Valley University, it's my pleasure to welcome you here to the first of two presidential lectures as part of the 2014-15 school year. My name is Brian Birch. I'm the director of the Religious Studies program here at Utah Valley and have the privilege of working with President Holland on the presidential lectures and on other things related to religious studies and interfaith dialogue, which is what we're here today to celebrate. It's a delight to see so many here to celebrate the Reflection Center ribbon cutting, which just took place at noon. The Reflection Center is a space that represents UVU's commitment to inclusion. President Holland will say a word or two more about that in his introduction of Dr. Patel. But we're honored and privileged to have had the help and assistance from so many people on this campus and in the community to help advance interreligious understanding and eventually to build this wonderful reflection center that really is a brick and mortar manifestation of our commitment to cross-cultural dialogue, religious understanding, the cultivation of spirituality, diversity, and conversation between ethical perspectives. In an event like this, it's only fitting that we begin with music. So before I invite President Holland to come to the stand, we are going to hear an interfaith musical number, which is a collaborative effort between students here at Utah Valley University, St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Provo, and the Orem Institute of Religion's choir, which, as many of you know, is superb. The number you will hear is titled "Come Flood This Heart of Mine" and features soloist Serena Koenig-Benisch from St. Mary's. Some of you know Serena very well from her musical work in the community. Very ecumenically oriented, and we thank her for being here. The number will be accompanied by Ellen Amatangelo on piano and violinist Garrett Hazen. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming this interfaith choir number.
Thanks for that wonderful performance. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Fall 2014 Presidential Lecture. For the past 4 years, we have been honored to host some of the finest scholars and creative minds in the world. As many here know, this series is part of a broader effort of our university to provide a forum of dialogue in an atmosphere of civility and mutual respect. UVU prides itself on being an inclusive institution wherein a diversity of ideas and perspectives are welcomed and valued. Through interaction with influential scholars, policymakers, and other leaders on the national and global stage, our campus community becomes better prepared to meet the challenges and the opportunities of a multidimensional world. In this spirit, we are delighted today to be joined by a world-class thought leader and public intellectual. Named by U.S. News & World Report as one of America's best leaders, Dr. Eboo Patel is the founder and president of Interfaith Youth Core, a Chicago-based organization designed to build a global interfaith youth movement. He is the author of award-winning book, Acts of Faith, the story of an American Muslim and sacred ground, pluralism, prejudice, and the promise of America. Eboo is also a regular contributor to the Washington Post, National Public Radio, and CNN. He is a member of President Obama's Advisory Council of the White House Office on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and holds a doctorate in sociology of religion from Oxford University, where he studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. One of Eboo's core beliefs is that religion is a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier or division. He has presented his vision in forums such as the TED Conference, the Clinton Global Initiative, and the Nobel Peace Prize Forum. His organization works with over 300 campuses across the country on developing activities for interreligious understanding and shared action. Given Dr. Patel's profile, this lecture could not come at a better time for our campus. With concentrated effort, we have worked this past year to deepen our institutional commitment to inclusion. Today, we are celebrating the opening of our new Reflection Center, which is a concrete manifestation of our commitment to interreligious understanding and cross-cultural dialogue. But bricks and mortar are just one part. The university has been active in the study of religious diversity for nearly 20 years. UVU has hosted more than 100 conferences, lectures, workshops, symposia, and other events to help deepen our students' experience with other perspectives and to find the common ground of cooperation. This past year, we've developed a formal partnership with Interfaith Youth Core to draw from their experience at the national level and to consult with us on how we can provide our students the best experience both in their community and on the global stage. In his best-selling book, Acts of Faith, Dr. Patel pens a remarkable insight into his journey of discovery. He says, "My struggle to understand the traditions I belong to as mutually enriching rather than mutually exclusive is the story of a generation of young people standing at the crossroads of inheritance and discovery, trying to look both ways. There is a strong connection between finding a sense of inner coherence and developing a commitment to pluralism. And that has everything to do with who meets you at the crossroads." This could not express better the spirit of what we are trying to accomplish here at UVU. Dr. Patel, welcome to our campus. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to start with the video. The big idea of this institute is to train a generation of interfaith leaders. An interfaith leader is somebody with the vision, the knowledge base, and the skill set to bring large numbers of people together in high-profile interfaith cooperation activities.
Stepping up as an interfaith leader has changed my life because it's changed my perspective. It's taught me to be a better Christian, and it's taught me about the people who are now my friends who are different than I am.
There are really deep differences on really important areas. Those deep differences are very important, but they're not the only important thing.
I'm really excited to learn about specifically how non-religious people and religious people can work together to tackle common problems. Because I feel like there's a lot of common ground we all share and a lot of secular problems we can all work together, and it just seems strange to me that we should go about it separate ways when we're all going towards the same goal.
So cool.
In South Carolina, many times we tend to self-segregate, and bringing groups together tends to be very difficult. And I'm here because I want to learn what are some of those tactics, what are some of those techniques and methodology and methods that can be used to help bring people together to help bridge the divide.
Bingo. You don't have to know everything about every religion since time immemorial, but what you can do is if you have a large enough and diverse enough.
In January of 2009, we met with the president in the Oval Office, and he talked about the importance of young people working together to serve others in America, especially at this difficult economic time. And I said, you know, President Obama, there are thousands of young people who want to lead the interfaith service efforts that you just referenced. And the president smiled and said, we're going to be following up with you on that. And this event, this Interfaith Leadership Training Institute, this is that follow-up. And these young people, those are the young people the president was referring to.
What if all American students from all different faith backgrounds came together to work on issues relating to HIV and AIDS in the DC area? I'm Aubrey, I'm Catholic, and I believe we're better together.
A specific social issue that I would like to get people involved with at DePaul is hunger. I think there's a lot of hungry people in Chicago, and I think we have the resources to feed everyone in Chicago.
Growing up, I experienced a lot of discrimination early on. My town is about 95% white, and to be other was just unheard of.
We are in the era of interfaith cooperation. Right now, the television is telling too many stories about religion as a bomb of destruction, but I promise you that when these college students come of age, the television is going to be telling their stories about faith as a bridge of cooperation, as a generation that knows we are better together.
Bring it down now. Nice. All right. Okay.
So I'm excited to be here for several reasons today. One is you keep on having 75-degree days in Utah, and I will keep on coming. So keep creating this. The other is because Utah Valley University and other institutions in this state have made a commitment to be ecologies that nurture the kind of young people that you saw in that video. Young people who view faith not as a barrier of division or as a bomb of destruction, but as a bridge of cooperation, and who know that bridges don't fall from the sky or rise from the ground. People build them. And you need a place that nurtures those people. You need a place where they can practice their bridge building, where they learn the skills and the knowledge, and there are the natural resources available to do that kind of work. And Utah Valley University is committing today to be that kind of place. It's long in the planning. I know that because I've been involved in the conversation for just 2 years, but knowing Brian and his team, this has been a dream for 10, 15, 20 years. So I am amazingly honored to be with you at a major day in the history of Utah Valley University, and I think in the state of Utah. So I talked earlier about a subject which I know something about. My analogy was about India. I'm going to begin this talk with an analogy about science, which I know almost nothing about, so we will not take it that far. It's about nuclear energy and nuclear reactions. And in their book called No Longer Invisible, on religion and contemporary higher education, Rhonda and Doug Jacobson say that inviting religious diversity onto campus is a little bit like running a nuclear reactor. It can produce very positive power, which can heat a city. It can also have a meltdown. And as I was rereading that book on the flight here this morning from Chicago, I was thinking to myself, the amazing thing about America, especially its colleges and universities, is that that nuclear reaction is already happening. You have no choice about it. That religious diversity is here. Those particles are already bumping into each other at high speed, high intensity. That energy is being created. The only question for you is, are you going to create the structures that channels that energy in a positive, productive direction? Or are you going to let it potentially spin out of control into a meltdown? And what my talk today is about is really offering a view of the work that you are already doing in making a university community an ecology of interfaith cooperation, in creating the structures so that the nuclear energy that's already being created by the interactions that are happening on this campus and beyond can be channeled in a direction that's positive and productive for the spiritual and intellectual formation of your students, for the professional and educational life of your community, and I think for the civic life of the country and the world. I want to open with this story, the story of my friend and colleague Cassie Meyer, who's worked with me for 9 years at Interfaith Youth Core. We were a very young organization when she joined our staff, and I think at that point I still interviewed everybody who we hired. And I'll never forget the story that Cassie told that got her hired at Interfaith Youth Core 9 years ago. She told me that she grew up as an evangelical Christian in Seattle. Interestingly, her household was basically secular humanist, but she made the decision as a teenager to join the church. And it was a fervent church, one with loud praise songs and a deep commitment to Jesus Christ and an ethic of proselytization. And when she went to college at Lawrence University in upstate Wisconsin, one of Cassie's initial challenges was understanding that in this university of 2,000, 2,500 people, there were only enough people who called themselves Christian. This was the early mid-1990s when, as Paul Simon said, a lot of people thought that faith was an island in the setting sun and proof was the bottom line for everyone. Not a whole lot of people naming themselves as religious on American campuses back in those days, at least in liberal arts campuses in upstate Wisconsin. So Cassie, who'd grown up in this evangelical environment, had to look around at the mainline Protestants and the Catholics and the people who were still struggling to think of themselves as Christian at all and say, all of us, all 25 or 30 or 35 of us are going to call ourselves a single religious group called Christian. This was a theological challenge for Cassie. She had been taught by some of the preachers in her church that Catholics weren't Christian. Cassie was about to encounter a much deeper theological struggle, and it came in the form of a Bangladeshi Muslim who approaches her in the library one night. And he says to Cassie, you know, I've been observing you. I've been observing your rituals and your practices and your distinct language and the clothes that you wear and the little bracelets around your wrist. And it seems to me that you're part of what in my Anthropology 101 class we're calling a tribal community. And I'm supposed to do an exercise in interviewing a member of a tribal community. And you campus Christians seem to be a pretty good candidate for that. So could you answer these 10 questions on my worksheet? And Cassie was thinking to herself, I'm the white American Christian, right? You're the Bangladeshi Muslim. How is it that you consider me part of a tribal community? But she answers the questions about rituals and practices and language and key texts, etc. And then she turns the questions on her Bangladeshi Muslim friend, Ahmed. And she says, what are your rituals? And Ahmed talks about praying 5 times a day. What are some of the ethics of your religious tradition? And he talks about abstaining from alcohol. What are your core texts? And he talks about the Quran as being co-eternal with God. And as Cassie is listening to this, she finds a strange thing occurring within her, a strange emotion. The emotion is admiration. She thinks to herself, my goodness, you pray 5 times a day, including a prayer at dawn? I can barely get my entire Christian group up at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning to take them to church. And she's beginning what is for her, for a couple of years, a pretty deep theological struggle, because what she's been taught in the church in which she grew up was that Ahmed was really nothing more except than a target for proselytization. But the emotion that she's feeling at the time is a sense of, wow, I actually have deep admiration for the set of commitments that you make. Now, Ahmed was clear with her. He's like, I don't always wake up for Fajr prayer. And the alcohol thing, yes, it's a good thing. I'm 19 and in college. So, like a lot of other people, he was also struggling with the rituals and practices of her tradition. But all of a sudden, Cassie's theological life, her formational life, if you will, gets a lot more complicated. And as I was listening to her tell this story, I thought to myself, some version of that is happening. That nuclear interaction, that energy, that ferment within Cassie, and who knew what was happening within Ahmed at the time, that is happening every minute of every day on every campus in this country. That's the kind of stuff that 19-year-olds think about and do all the time. And that's one of the reasons that college campuses are around. So what is going to be done with that nuclear energy? What sorts of structures can be created for that interaction, for the questions that it spins off, the who am I questions, the how do I relate to you, the what else do I need to know about my religion? Is the only way that I can relate to you to seek to proselytize? Or can I admire you as well? If I do admire you, does that mean I don't want to proselytize you? Where does this 5 times a day prayer ritual come from anyway? What do you mean that the Quran is co-eternal with God? This whole set of questions in that one microcosm of an event. As William Blake says, you can see a world in a grain of sand, right? I saw right there in that grain of sand, and that little incident in Cassie's life in the library, a world of what was occurring on college campuses. I want to use that incident to spin off into the rest of this talk. And I want to address 3 big areas here. Number 1, religious diversity in America. Why it matters in a major way for the private lives of individuals, as we just heard in Cassie's stories, but also for the public life of our nation and our world. Number 2, why universities ought to be the leading institution to deal with issues of religious diversity. And number 3, what it means for universities to do this well. There's a lot of average out there in the world. I don't think we should be going for average in anything, but least of all an area as important as interfaith cooperation. What does good look like? And what does it look like to try to achieve that? Before I begin, I want to tell a couple of quick framing stories. And basically what this comes down to is that the stake that Utah Valley University put in the ground today in the inauguration of its Reflection Center is some version of something that I think is going to be happening at university campuses across the country in 10 or 15 years. In other words, colleges and universities across the country are going to realize that directly engaging religious diversity is unavoidable. Just like directly engaging racial diversity is unavoidable. Just like directly engaging issues of gender and ethnicity and nationality and sexuality is unavoidable. The question is, are you going to be proactive about it? Are you going to have a plan, a vision? Are you going to put in place responsible structures that seek to engage this positively and proactively? Frankly, part of the question is, who's going to be first? Who's going to be on the vanguard? Who's going to define what good looks like in practice? Who's going to be the institution that other institutions say, they're 10 years ahead of us. We know we're behind the 8 ball on this. Let's figure out what they're doing. So one of the reasons that I made a commitment to come here today was because I wanted to be present at one of the first public universities in the country that's put a stake in the ground and said, we're going to do this and we're going to do it well. At a public institution with a 90% LDS population that says, we're going to make sure that we have spaces for our Saudi Muslim students, for our evangelical Christian students, for our secular humanist students, for the Jews and Hindus who might one day come to this campus, who are today only here in small numbers, but as Utah diversifies, as America diversifies, we want them to know that Utah Valley University is a place for them. That's one of the frames of this right now, that you have effectively put a stake in the ground and you've said, we want to be on the vanguard of engaging the messy reality of religious diversity, and we want to define what good looks like. Religious diversity in America. So let me frame this with a story. There are two guys in a cafe in California. One is straight-laced and clean-cut. The other is a little shaggy hair. The straight-laced, clean-cut guy asked the shaggy-haired guy, so, do you know anything about Eastern religion? The shaggy-haired guy says, yeah, I used to know some Methodists when I lived in Pennsylvania. By the way, there's a couple reasons that I love being in largely LDS communities. Number one, you're polite enough to laugh at that joke. Thank you very much. Number two, nobody says, so how come they weren't meeting in a bar, right? We Muslims and LDS folks, we meet in cafes. We drink different things in cafes, but we meet in cafes. So it's a little window into American religious diversity, right? So Diana Eck, scholar at Harvard University, one of the subtitles of her book, A New Religious America, is how a Christian nation became the most religiously diverse country in human history. That is a stunning fact. Think about that for a second. In no other political entity at any time in human history have more people from more different religious communities gathered at any single time. Put that up against this fact, that America is by orders of magnitude the most religiously devout nation in the Western Hemisphere. That means that the rate at which people say they believe in God, that they pray before meals, that they attend worship services on a regular basis, that God plays a meaningful role in their lives, these are all 2, 3, 4, 5 times higher than our sister countries in Europe. One of the interesting things about the United States is that our atheists still pray, and that's a fact, right? So even the 20% of Americans who say they're non-religious, a majority of them say that they pray occasionally. It's not for nothing that the great British writer G.K. Chesterton said that America is a nation with the soul of a church. Most religiously diverse nation in human history, most religiously devout nation in the West at a time of global religious conflict. I'm going to say that again. Most religiously diverse nation in human history, most religiously devout nation in the West at a time of global religious conflict. Religion matters in America. More people from more different religious backgrounds bump into each other with frequency and intensity in America, and they are connected to groups of people at each other's throats all over the world. You don't think that there are Muslims in America who care about the fate of the Palestinians, and Jews in America who care about the safety and security in Israel, and that there wasn't profound tension between those groups these last 6 weeks of the war in Gaza? You don't think there are Iraqi Shias in America, and Iraqi Sunnis, and Iraqi Kurds who are deeply invested in the fate of that country, where the lines are drawn, who has the oil rights, who the prime minister is, what happens when it comes to American air support? Sinhalese Buddhists in the United States from Sri Lanka and Tamil Hindus from Sri Lanka at each other's throats because of the war that has taken place there over, in some ways, the past quarter century, but that really became intensified over the past 3 years. In a lot of ways, the remarkable things about America is that the religious conflicts from elsewhere that have diaspora groups here who care about them don't spill over into our shores. But of course, they take place in other ways. One of my colleagues at Interfaith Youth Core, Noah Silverman, joked that more people have unfriended each other in Facebook over the last 2 months over religious conflicts than at any other time in Facebook's long and storied history of whatever it is, 8 years, right? I mean, it's actually a big deal to live in the most religiously diverse nation in human history, in the most religiously devout nation in the West at a time of global religious conflict. It is a big deal to make a declaration that faith should not be a bomb of destruction or a barrier of division or a bunker of isolation, but ought to be a bridge of cooperation. Because I'll tell you something, those bridges don't just happen naturally. And right now, the things that are dividing people seem as wide and ugly as ever. And if you need any proof of that, go to today's New York Times, which I confess I haven't read, but I will place a friendly Muslim wager that if you were to flip through that paper and cut out all of the stories in the international section, A1 to A8, that dealt with religious conflict abroad and piled those stories up, and then went to the domestic section and started to cut out all the stories that dealt with political issues in the United States, in which different orientations around religion have carved out their ground, put down their stake: gay marriage, abortion, the healthcare law, contraception, where people line up vis-a-vis the American government on the Middle East, and you put that in another pile, you're going to have two relatively high piles of newspaper articles and not a lot of newspaper left. Religious diversity issues in America, I mean, I don't know if there are that many more important public issues than these to deal with. What do you need to know? What do your students need to know? What will their children one day need to know to be able to read the New York Times with some degree of fluency, to know what a Sunni, the difference between a Sunni and a Shia Muslim is? The conversation that we had with your two exceptional student leaders on the way back from the airport. What will your students need to know about the history of Sri Lanka and the various migrations there to even be able to follow articles about the conflict between Sinhalese Buddhists and Tamil Hindus? What might they need to know about the history of India and Pakistan? These are the various public issues that religious diversity puts on our table. But there's a set of private issues as well. What will they need to know about their own traditions as they encounter people in their schools, on their college campuses, who they like and admire from other religions? What will they need to know about those other religions? What kind of sorting out might they need to do? These are all things that are going to be center stage in public life in America. And things that are center stage public life in America, especially messy things, we turn to universities to address. And that's the second part of my talk. Why should universities lead in the area of engaging religious diversity? So let's take as a given the Cassie story. Let's take as a given that universities are hothouse environments where interactions between people from different backgrounds are simply part of the water, just part of what happens. In fact, that's one of the reasons that we think universities are so important in American public life. It's precisely to give a space for those types of interactions to happen. Let's take a second thing as a given, that universities are institutions who view their mission, and in fact have been charged by the public with the mission of educating people. But I want to raise that one. A part of what universities do is define what it means to be an educated person. You don't just educate people willy-nilly. You say part of being an educated person is scientific literacy. Part of being an educated person is literacy and minority cultures. Part of being an educated person in America is reading Mark Twain and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Toni Morrison. How can you be an educated person in America in the 21st century and have no literacy in the world's great religious traditions? Diane Eck, again, the scholar I cited from Harvard, said on a video that I saw on her once with some incredulity, we think that in order to be an educated person, you need to have dissected a frog, but not to know anything about the religious practices of 1.5 billion people on the planet called Muslims. One of the things I think is so important about what you're doing at Utah Valley University is you're integrating a reflection center grounded in your values of inclusion and wellness with an academic program. You are defining part of being an educated person as having some degree of literacy in the great religious traditions and the practices of large religious communities that make up our country and our world. What else do universities do? Why else is it important for universities to take on this issue? So one of the things I love about universities is you are laboratories and launching pads for the future. You are practice for the public. You are a place where 19-year-olds get knowledge and skills and try that knowledge base out and exercise those skills and try to create here a community that lives up to its definition of good and thereby practices so they are able to do that when they are teachers and principals, when they are nurses and doctors, when they are legislators and governors. Universities are laboratories and launching pads for the future. And one of the things I love about that is you set a very high bar for what your community should be. It's what I call the bar of pluralism. Universities take 3 things extremely seriously. Number 1, you take the identities of your students, the identities of constituent communities seriously. I loved the young representative who spoke at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She struck me as a student. Maybe she was a professor here, but she looked to me like she was young enough to be representing the student body when she said, "It is unacceptable that our Muslim students at Utah Valley University have had to pray in bathroom stalls. We should be giving them a dignified place to pray." That's respect for people's identities. And universities do that as well as any institution in our society. Second part of being an ideal community is you seek to cultivate positive relationships between those communities. So as she was talking, I didn't know if she was LDS or an evangelical Christian or Jewish, but I thought to myself, here is a young woman who not only wants to respect the identity of a different group on campus, but wants to cultivate a positive relationship, wants to build understanding, wants to make sure that there's a sense of appreciation, wants there to be, in President Holland's words, a bond of affection. And finally, you have a commitment to the common good. This thing called Utah Valley University, that reflection center, your interfaith programs are going to help build the broader university, help speak to its principles of inclusion and wellness, and all of these things, this sense of a respect for identity, cultivating positive relationships between different communities, having a commitment to that common good is what a university community strives to be. So think about that in the context of being a laboratory and a launching pad. And think about that especially in the context of the various resources that you have on offer. There's lots of places that strive to be ideal communities who have nowhere near the resources to make that happen. But you do have the educational resources. You have them in the form of curriculum, your instructors, your courses, your research. You have classes where students go and they can learn about the rituals and texts and practices of 1.5 billion of their fellow human beings on this planet called Muslims. You have co-curricular activities, chaplaincies and diversity offices and service learning programs where people can build the skills to build that ideal community of pluralism. And one of the things I love about universities is how all of those things are integrated together. You can walk into Brian Birch's class on the Mormon tradition, the Christian tradition, and other religions. You can get a window into the beautiful panoply of how the human condition is understood the universal quality called faith. You can listen to him talk about the importance of building bridges between these communities, and then you can walk across campus to this reflection center, to this beautiful student life building, and you can meet with the diversity office. You can meet with chaplains. You can meet with the service learning officer, and you can say, I want to put this knowledge into practice and start an interfaith group, the group that Jordan currently leads. I want to put this knowledge into practice so that we can make the common good that is Utah Valley University a better place. Utah Valley University as laboratory, a place where people get to practice forming community. Utah Valley University as launching pad, a place that the current and future leaders of Utah, America, and the world get to cut their teeth, get to flex their muscles, get to be good at one of the most important things on the planet, which is building genuinely pluralistic community. So, this is a message directly to the students in this room. Take advantage of your 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years here. Take advantage of a university being a laboratory and a launching pad. Take advantage of all of these people asking you what you want to be and how they can help you. The single most disorienting thing for me when I graduated from college was realizing that there were not 1,000 people on the payroll telling me how great my idea was. You will discover that too. Right now, all of these people in the room who are not students, their job is to help you become as good as you are willing to be on this campus, to be a laboratory and a launching pad for you. I promise you, take advantage of that. I would trade places with you pretty darn fast. Finally, what does it mean to do this well? I'm going to be very honest with you. There is a lot of average interfaith work in the world right now. We are a field in development. In other fields, public health, education, there are definitions of good. There are ways to evaluate good. There are foundations and government agencies who will only give you money if you're good or if you know someone, but that's just the real world. We really haven't developed that yet in interfaith work. But if this field is going to be worth its salt, if we're going to make the difference that we need to make in the world, we better define what good looks like, and we better seek to achieve it. So let me offer an analog for this. Back in the day when I was a student leader at the University of Illinois, I remember having a meeting of student leaders with the president of the university, where the president said, much to my surprise, because I thought he was going to spend his entire time giving us a homily on the importance of business and science, which were the strong areas of U of I in the late 20th century and still now. Instead, he talked an awful lot about diversity. And he offered this extremely compelling vision. He said, when I shake the hand of a University of Illinois graduate, all 7,000 of you graduating in the class of 1996, I want to have a reasonable degree of confidence that you, because of your 4 years at the University of Illinois and because of the degree we are conferring on you, you have acquired multicultural literacy, you have built multicultural relationships, and you've had the chance to develop multicultural leadership skills. And I thought to myself, that is a clarion vision. That is the gold standard. And the University of Illinois had done a reasonable amount of things to attempt to achieve that vision. So when the football coach gave speeches at pep rallies, he talked about rooming black and white athletes together. There were 2 minority culture requirements for all liberal arts and sciences students at the University of Illinois. From the day you step on campus at freshman orientation, you hear about the importance of diversity. If you become an RA or any other kind of student leader, half of your training is focused on diversity. The point that I'm making is it begins with the vision. It begins by saying, this is what the gold standard looks like. And President Stuckel's version of that is, when I shake the hand of an Illinois grad, I want to have a reasonable degree of confidence that that person, because of their 4 years on my campus, has acquired multicultural literacy, has built multicultural relationships, has had the chance to exercise multicultural leadership. What would your vision for religious diversity and interfaith cooperation be at Utah Valley University? Would you be able to articulate it in a single sentence? Would it be on the tip of the tongue of everybody from your incoming first-year student to the chair of your board of trustees? Would it be the kind of gold standard vision that all of you could aspire to? And then what would it look like to build a university ecology that sought to achieve that vision? Today is a giant step in that direction. A part of what we do at Interfaith Youth Core is we get a peek at what universities across the country are doing. And as a result of that, we're developing a list of what we call promising practices or hallmarks for achieving the gold standard of a campus community that that can call itself an ecology of interfaith cooperation. I want to share with you just a couple of those gold standard ideas today. Number one, something that you are accomplishing, I think, at the gold standard with your reflection center, a space that both affirms identity and nurtures relationships and community. I love hearing stories of your Saudi Muslim students praying in that reflection center. I love when Brian Birch is giving me the quick tour and he's telling me we wanted this to be a place where students from different religious backgrounds could exercise and practice their faith, but also where they met each other. This is a cornerstone of being an ecology of interfaith cooperation, a place where various identity communities feel affirmed and have the freedom and ability to practice their traditions, and where they are not in isolation, where they are in fact meeting each other. A second hallmark. This is going to be, a little bit of academic gobbledygook here, but hang with me. We call this an integrated curricular, co-curricular, horizontal, and vertical. The truth is, I look at my team from Interfaith Youth Core, they're like, you call it that, Eboo, because you carry the baggage of this crazy PhD, so you feel like you have to speak in 4-syllable fancy words. Okay, fine, I call it that. Let me double click on it for a second, right? What do I mean by an integrated co-curricular, curricular, horizontal, and vertical? Let's start with the two axes. A horizontal is the set of programs that you can be reasonably sure hits just about every student on your campus. Freshman orientation, required 100 and 101 classes. Is every one of your students getting a touch with religious diversity? Co-curricular and curricular is obvious. Is some of that touch in courses where they're actually looking at scholarship on different religions? Is some of that touch in student life where they're actually dealing with real people when it comes to different religious communities? An integrated curricular, co-curricular, horizontal, and vertical. That's the horizontal. What's the vertical? Well, the hope is that a set of your students gets lit on fire by this. And they think to themselves, like Cassie thought to herself, and after all, that moment with Ahmed, the Bangladeshi Muslim, caused her to go get an MDiv from the University of Chicago in religion and caused her to come work for IFYC for a decade. And that's part of what happens on campus. Things that happen to you when you're 18 on a college campus begin to define the path you take for the rest of your life. But for that to happen effectively at a university environment, there has to be a vertical. There has to be a ladder that people can climb up so that it doesn't just end with freshman orientation. It doesn't just end with a required 100 class. There is, as you have, a minor in this work. You can take a sequence of 4 classes in this. There is, as you have, an interfaith club at Utah Valley University where you can continue to build and practice your leadership skills. These are just 2 of the hallmarks, and they are rooted again in a vision. What is that vision? Can you articulate it in 1 or 2 sentences? Is it the kind of thing that sets people's blood on fire because it ought to, because you are dealing with one of the most flammable issues on the planet, the issue of religious diversity? And are you taking steps to build an ecology a set of programs that can reasonably help get you to that vision. You're the person I was citing earlier. I'm going to conclude with two thoughts. Where does this all lead? So, one of the things that I love about university environments, summed up in the line, if you want a great city, build a great university and wait a century. Right? If you want a great city, build a great university and wait a century. That's one of the reasons today is so exciting, because you are building a great interfaith cooperation program into a great university. What gifts will that give to Salt Lake, to Utah, to America, to the world in the decades to come? That remains to be seen, but it is enormously exciting. I want to talk about two brief dimensions of that in my closing. One is a professional dimension. Robert Putnam, one of my mentors and one of the people that I know you're considering as a presidential lecturer here, begins his famous Skite Prize address with the line, "The one thing that we can safely say about every society is that it will be more diverse in the future than it is today. Even Utah." The one thing that we can safely say about Utah is it will be more diverse in the future than it is today. Your schools, your hospitals, your refugee resettlement agencies and communities, your social service programs will have more religious diversity in 5 months and 5 years and 50 years. Who will staff those places? Who will have the religious diversity competency, the interfaith knowledge and leadership skills to deal not only with an Iraqi refugee population, but an Iraqi refugee population that is Kurdish and Shia and Sunni and is collectively fleeing a war where the three of those groups are at each other's throats. And when they move to Salt Lake, do you think it's all over? That they don't have family there? That people who watch their cousins get killed by other people can simply forget? No. They bring those issues here. They show up in the schools and the hospitals and the social service agencies. Who will staff those agencies and schools and hospitals? Who will be the principals of those schools? The CEOs of those hospitals, the superintendents of those districts, the presidents of those social service agencies. Who is designing the programs that will build the knowledge and the leadership skills to deal with those challenges and opportunities? America was built by immigrants, by people coming from the four corners of the world who spoke in different languages, who prayed to God in different ways, who made a decision to build together a nation. And that's just an overdrive in the 21st century. But it's the same American story, just squared. Who will have the knowledge and the skills to build the civic bridges that will build a nation? The best language for that is the language that I've been reading over the last week in President Holland's book. Who will be able to build the bonds of affection that build cities, states, nations, and planets? And I'll tell you something right now. There is no place that needs said affection more than the space between communities who orient around religion differently. The space where other people build bombs, other people build barriers, and you at Utah Valley University are committing to raise up a generation of people who will build bridges. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that standing ovation. I didn't realize that I had done so much to deserve it. Dr. Patel, we're deeply honored to have you here, and what you said strikes at the heart of what I've been interested in for many years. So for me, you're preaching to the choir, but I hope that your ideas had resonance. Obviously, they did for those here. And I have to say the most important and momentous compliment that you received is the fact that it is 2 o'clock and classes begin on the hour, and very few students had to leave for class. There's no deeper honor at UVU than to have that happen, because it doesn't happen to me as often as I would like. So we have a few minutes for question and answers. There are roving microphones, so we've got 2 students stationed out there in the audience to take your questions. We're also going to do a bit of a variation this time where President Holland and Eboo will field your questions. So in the interest of civility, please wait for the microphone to arrive. Please state your question briefly, and please make sure that it is a question. So those are the 3 requirements. So with that in mind, do we have our microphone stewards?
Hello, my name is Mona Green, and I've been a student here for a long time. I'm Native American, and I noticed the title for your book. And in my own experience, personally, individually, and then also watching individuals who are inspiring leaders, they usually experience a challenge or challenges that is a prerequisite for their ability to inspire others. So I'd like to ask, what has been your greatest challenge, and how did you overcome it, and what did you learn?
That was very effective. He passed it off to me. But I'm sure you weren't complimenting the title of my book. You know, there are a number of things that come to mind about challenges in life that I faced. One of them for me, as I look out and think about students, was a decision to go into academia. I loved my undergraduate experience. I loved the life of learning and books, but I'd gone off to work in the professional world, and I came to this moment where I realized that my intellectual interests, my love of teaching, my love of working with students was trumping whatever enjoyment and success I was experiencing in the corporate world. But that was a very personal and difficult moment for me to make that transition back into a lifetime of academia and going off to a far-flung land. Maybe I'm thinking about this because Eboo asked me about my intellectual journey and my path out of Utah to get education and to return back. But going out into the world, going out into a different environment, intellectually, culturally, religiously, was eye-opening for me, formative for me, and something that I navigated both by repositories of faith, but also a determination that this was a good and right thing to do civically, socially, and those, I think the vision of those things powered me through into what turned out to be a fantastic experience and has made all the difference in my both professional and personal life.
That's a great, thank you, Mona. That's a great question. So you shared a little bit about yourself in terms of your Native American heritage, and I appreciate that. So I'll share a little bit about myself in this answer. So I would say that probably my greatest leadership challenge is toning down my self-righteousness. And I remember it. I remember, you know, the first punch in the face coming when I was in college, and I would be lying if I said I learned my whole lesson then. But it's the first memory I have is I was in a Latino studies class and was with a kind of a giant of Latino studies who was teaching, and 28 of the 30 students were were Latino, and they were talking entirely appropriately, as was part of their identity and the subject matter, about Latino identity issues. And I felt like it was my purpose in that class to raise the entire set of issues that people were not talking about. So instead of thinking to myself, what an enriching learning experience to be a part of a group of people who are from a different identity, and to listen deeply into their conversation, I would raise my hand and say, how come you're not talking about gender? And I would raise my hand and say, how come you're not talking about Asian American issues? And I could, by the third time I did this, or the third class, I could literally feel people sinking in their seats and rolling their eyes, but you know, I just kept right on going. And I think it was like the 8th class, the professor called me up after class and said, you know, you make a set of interesting points, and it's possible that people would listen to you more if you weren't such a jerk. And I've thought about that for 20 years. And he's out there somewhere, and I just want to tell him he's right. That probably people would have listened to me more if I hadn't said things as such a jerk. And I probably still say things as a jerk. And my definition of jerk is hey idiot, don't you believe in what I'm saying, right? And using that tone and that type of language instead of, listening to what other people are saying and having a sense of what's meaningful for them. So I would say I think that, God gifted me with probably more self-righteousness than the average bear. Perhaps it's an especially heavy burden that I have, but I see it in a lot of potentially exceptional college student leaders, is a quickness to self-righteousness. It's one of the things that I tell them that I wish that I had I'd been able to dim earlier in my journey, and I think that it would have made me both more effective and happier.
You point and I'll go. Who do you want next? You point and I'll go.
I'm telling you, every time I come to Utah, I'm like, these people achieve new levels of politeness. That's like, you just pick people.
I just have a quick question. So almost 10 months ago, I joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And from being on the outside and then being in the church, I have really felt my heart go out to members that aren't in the church and non-actives. And I guess my question is more not in terms of looking at one religion or another, but really how, with the separation in the standards and the beliefs, both in Utah and in the United States or in the world, how can we separate the religion and teach people their divine potential while also keeping to our standards and what we believe that divine potential is?
I mean, that is an awesome question. I think it was really beautifully put. So, I think my answer to that is, it is wrapped up in my definition of pluralism, right, which I define in 3 parts: identity, relationship, and common good. And part of how I define identity is that everybody has a right to their own identity. And that's actually, it sounds simple, but it's actually a massive thing, right? It's a massive thing to say that people have a right to the way that they interpret their relationship with the divine, how they understand being American or black or white or Mormon or Muslim or whatever. And other people have a right to disagree with it, right? So people have a right to be who they are, and part of being who you are is a right to disagree with other people. And I think that in part, that is a way of understanding religious diversity. You get to be a Sufi Muslim. I get to disagree with you. It's part of respect for identity. The second part of respect for identity is, and this gets even more complicated, people get to express who they are. So, and that happens in all sorts of ways. You can build a church to express your religious identity. You can stand on the corner and preach the gospel and express your religious identity. You can do, I think as Augustine said, which is you can preach the gospel in other ways, using words only if necessary, right? But one of the reasons that there is a set of conflict around religious diversity is if people have a right to their identity, and if those identities are different, and if people have a right to express their diverse identities, then that disagreement is going to come out in the public. Welcome to diversity, right? The definition of diversity is not interesting ethnic foods. The definition of diversity is deep disagreement on fundamental matters. But there's two other parts to pluralism. Part two is relationship. And the way I would define relationship is, how can you and I, who have, it seems, different identities when it comes to a relationship, when it comes to how we understand religion, how do we still have a relationship? My guess is there's a million things you and I could talk about that we have deep agreement on. So most Muslims and most Mormons, as a practice of their tradition, don't drink alcohol. And that puts us in a very interesting minority in American adult social life. We would have a lot to talk about going to public functions where alcohol is flowing, and people are like, can I get you a drink? And you and I know what they mean, and you and I know what we mean by a drink, right? A lot to still talk about. And how do we talk about the areas in which we disagree in a civil way? And I think part of civility is you saying to me, I really wish you would achieve your divine potential. And the only way you can do it is through the LDS Church. That is a part of civility. It's a part of relationship. And a part of relationship is me saying, thank you for that invitation. I'd like to change the conversation now. I think both of those things, all of those things, areas of agreement, areas of disagreement, invitations, polite declines, all of those things are a part of having relationships. And the final thing is the common good, which is we share a bunch of things in common that, and not just you and me, but there's a bunch of things out there that we're invested in collectively, right? Clean air matters. Clean water matters. Good school matters. Don't care what religion you are, right? Freedom of religion matters, right? So I think that those three things together, and it's complex, and there are books to be written on them. One day I will actually get the time to write a book on them. Identity, relationship, common good. I think that that's how we negotiate engagements across deep and fundamental, and yet well-meaning diversity.
The question I have is, how is it most polite and civil to respond to other people's arrogant assertion that their reality is, that their truth is reality? Is it my responsibility to let them understand that what they're telling is a subjective opinion as opposed to provable truth? And I understand people's motivation to assert and testify of what they hold as reality, but it's very off-putting, and I often am very motivated to say, do you realize how what word? Insulting or off-putting to state your conviction as a statement of fact is very inappropriate.
Y'all two got to go get a sparkling water together, you know? Twist the lime, right? That was a joke, people. Joke. So here's the thing about religions, right? Is for those of us who are believers, they're objective realities. And other people have a right to say exactly what you said. This is exactly why the most famous philosophers of the 20th century said, you can't talk about religion in a democracy. And I'm not kidding. Richard Rorty, in Philosophy and Social Hope, famously says religion is a conversation stopper. John Rawls, the most famous philosopher, probably since the, maybe since the Enlightenment, along with people like Isaiah Berlin, says that because religions are comprehensive understandings of the good that root themselves in what they think are objective realities, religion has no place in public conversations in a democracy, because they couldn't deal. They decided that precisely what you're talking about people believing that their view on reality and the cosmos was objective fact, couldn't be negotiated in a democracy. Well, guess what? We live in the most religiously diverse democracy in human history and the most religiously devout nation in the West. So we got to. You can't tell people that they're not allowed to vote how they believe their religious traditions, which to them means, and to me means, our objective realities. Nurture them, nurture us to vote. Can't tell folks that they can't support candidates based on that. You can't tell folks that they can't bring those arguments or discussions or perspectives into class. And those of us who have these objective realities that are called religious traditions, comprehensive understandings of the good, right? Again, in the Rawlsian framework, we have to understand that we live in a nation of 320 million people. And unless we want to quarantine ourselves, we gotta check ourselves every once in a while, right? As my 7-year-old likes to tell me, right? And I just think that that's the messiness of living in a diverse society. The messiness of living in a diverse society is that people get to decide and define their own identities. And other people get to do it too. And part of the definition of an identity is saying I don't agree with you. And part of the definition of freedom is the freedom to express that. And part of that definition is somebody saying to you, you are objectively wrong. And part of that freedom is you saying, you're insulting me. And I think pluralism is the continual negotiation of that in a nation of 320 million people who have different objective realities. You're taking the next one. These are getting progressively harder.
This is sort of a question for both of you. I think thought on everyone's mind right now is what's the next step? Obviously, we've all been very inspired by the words said here today and by the ribbon cutting. But for President Holland, how would you have the students of UVU progress now towards more interfaith cooperation? And then for Eboo as well, for the Core itself, is there anything we can do directly to help you in your efforts?
Well, thank you for the question. I was interviewed I was delighted to see the community interest in this event. We had numerous press outlets covering our ribbon cutting. And one of the questions I got was in the spirit of your question, but directed more to the Reflection Center. This is great. Do you have any other big plans like this? And so I'll give the response to them. I'll give that to you here, which is to say, it was a monumental thing that happened today, this building of the Reflection Center, which creates a physical space where we can have the kind of dialogue and exchange that Eboo is talking about. And that's not an insignificant thing. It's a formal way of the university saying, this is so important that we want it to happen, we're going to make it easier to happen, we're going to give it a physical support in order to happen. But in many ways, this is just the beginning. This isn't the culmination, this isn't the end, we're not declaring victory, far from it. This is really just the start. We're now, in some ways, ground zero. We've just gotten to the part where we can go to work and truly engage with one another. Now, that's a little bit of an overstatement because we have this long tradition of symposia and conferences on this issue. But I think what's changed today is that this now moves to not just the formal programs that we will continue to do, and we will continue to do those, and I think these will take on even added impetus with our inclusion initiative, with our physical space, with this emphasis that we're putting on it so that we will do more and more of that, but even informally. I hope that Reflection Center gets used. I hope it gets used for the very personal things that will happen, the reflection, the meditation, the prayer, the concern about spiritual life, but I hope it will get scheduled by clubs and organizations and courses to come in and use that as a place of exchange. And that students will work and that faculty will work together in the spirit of the call that's been issued here to say, how can we do more of it? We want more of it. How can the university help us provide more of it? You know, some of these things most institutions are developed in a two-way, with a kind of a two-way dimension, where an administration may have a vision or a view, but it's got to be met or stimulated by student and faculty demand and interest. And so, to the extent students can rise up and say, we want more courses in this area, and we'll sign up for them and we'll take them, we'll provide them. And I think in that sense, again, I see us on the front end of a long and fruitful process that will begin to have a really monumental effect in this community and beyond. Because as we know, the students who graduate from Utah Valley University are more and more not only contributing to the civic life of Utah, but they're going out and around the world. And you can do it now with coming from a community that's taken religious seriously and that has to deal with this in a very real-life, day-to-day kind of way, in ways that many other communities may not have provided for their students. And so if we can bring that academic dimension to it and that practiced experience to it, you'll be far better prepared. So we look forward to working with students like you and others to help us achieve that.
First I heard you, Dr. Patel, talking with Krista Tippett. And so when I saw your name come up on my computer, I had to be there. In addition to reading your 2 books, I would recommend the Dalai Lama's book, Toward a True, well, wait a minute, let me see if I can remember it now. Something of faith. Anyway, he does explain all the Eastern religions and then gets into ours, but the basis that he draws is every one of them builds on compassion. And that's something I'm afraid a lot of us are kind of short on because of our own not being experienced. You've had a lot of experience talking with other people. I would like to know where you see that coming in, that we just have compassion.
Right. So thank you for that. It's a terrific book that you just referenced, Toward a True Kinship of Faiths by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so at IFYC, and I'll respond to the second half of Phil's question also in this. At IFYC, we will often begin in interfaith discussion with students by saying, or with anybody, by saying, how does your religious or ethical tradition speak to compassion? Right? So the methodology, if you will, is to take a shared value, something that a wide range of religious and philosophical traditions would share, and the vast majority of human beings would consider an important value. We would call it deeply held and widely shared. And we would ask people to tell us what their particular path, their texts, their rituals, their practices, etc., is to living that out. We really like to do that twinned with an actual compassion project or a service project. Let me just get a sip of water. Phil, so look, you're not going to get rid of IFYC that quickly. So I'm thrilled that my colleagues Joe and Katie are here because we are in a longer-term partnership with Utah Valley University in helping the university articulate that high aspiration for interfaith cooperation and build on these exceptional kind of cornerstones that you've got, both in terms of an academic program and in terms of a reflection center, to build what we would call an ecology that aspires to that vision. In addition to that, and this is a direct invitation to you, we run a number of networks, student networks, faculty networks, staff and presidents networks that are cross-country, that bring people from a range of universities together who are doing this kind of work. So we have a major convening in a couple of weeks in Washington, D.C. You saw the video of our 2009 convening. We have Interfaith Leadership Institutes 4 times a year. We convene faculty who are teaching courses on interfaith cooperation through a loose grant. We convene presidents every year at the White House to talk about the progress they're making on interfaith cooperation. So we'd love it if you and others from UVU would participate in those networks, and that's already happening. You guys show up in force to some of these conferences, but we hope that goes on and on and on. I think there was a hand here that's been up with alacrity. Did you get your question answered?
My name is Erica Basalar Oaks, and I'm the student of the Year Award winner at Utah Valley University. One of the reasons that thank you. Thank you so much. I have a point, I promise. That's what I'm mentioning this award. One of the reasons that the university give these kinds of awards to the students is not only because they're high pursuits in education, but because they help others in their journey to integrate. And one thing that is very close to my heart has been integration. The 5 years that I'm almost ready to complete in this university has been integration, and how can I help other people integrate? And when I was nominated, they mentioned some of those things. You know, I believe in everyone having the same opportunity, no matter if you have a disability or wherever you come from. And I've noticed that as we try to integrate people and do these, as you suggested, integrated activities with people with different religions, that we always hit a plateau where there is a fine line between integration and toleration. Are we really integrating, or are we tolerating each other? Some religions have beliefs that they are superior than others. And although I see how we tolerate each other, I wanted to ask you, my question was, have you guys experienced success in going to the next level, which would be appreciation? And I'm a little nervous, I'm sorry. Appreciation, you know, because I believe that when we learn to appreciate each other, no matter what religion, we will go into a new step, a new reality, and we can really progress into this new level that we're all seeking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Beautifully put. And I think you ask a couple of very, very challenging and pointed questions, which I will offer direct answers to. So I think every religion, almost by definition, thinks it is superior to others. And I just think that's the deal, right? What I mean is this is a way in which I think religion is distinct from race or culture or a set of other identities. Because religions claim a fullness of the truth, right? So, look, I am a devoted Muslim. I have unbelievable admiration and appreciation for the LDS tradition. Unbelievable admiration and appreciation from the time I was in high school. Fred knows the story, my Mormon girlfriend in high school. And I think the prophet died in 632 AD, and there's no prophet after that. And that's a difference. And welcome to diversity, right? That's a difference. That difference doesn't mean that I don't have deep appreciation for the LDS tradition, or that I cannot learn from it, or that I do not admire it in many ways, or that I don't mutter to myself every once in a while, boy, I wish we Muslims could mobilize like those Mormons. But a part of dealing with religious diversity is recognizing irreconcilable differences, especially in the area of doctrine. And again, I just think I just think that's the deal, right? And I think in a way we have to be okay with that. And even my friends whom I admire and appreciate but disagree with on this, who are Unitarian Universalists, and they're like, but we think everybody's the same. I'm like, yeah, but you want me to come to your conference, right?
the Unitarian Universalist Conference. So you might think Muslims are the same, but at the end of the day, you want a certain set of commitments, which is entirely natural to being a religious tradition with a particular view of truth, and somebody else being a different religious tradition. So I think that that is a way that religion differs from language. I think to say English and Spanish, not one language isn't better, I think that that's a totally reasonable thing to say. I think that to say black and white, neither race is better, I think that's totally reasonable and correct. I think to say Chinese and Mexican, they're equal, there's not one is superior, I think that's totally reasonable and correct. But to ask a Christian to say that a Muslim who does not believe in the divinity of Jesus, which is cardinal for Christians, has the fullness of the truth, I don't think we can ask that. I think we can ask the second half of what you're saying. And I think what I'd like to suggest is a compromise, that you give me my disagreement and I'll give you your appreciation, which is to say that even in the light of disagreement, there is much to appreciate. There is much to appreciate. I appreciate many things in the Mormon tradition, which I agree with, like not drinking alcohol and a focus on family life. Frankly, I appreciate things I disagree with also, right? So I don't think that disagreement neutralizes appreciation. I do not think that we can ask for agreement or equality or certainly sameness between religious traditions.
One more question.
Is this on? Just checking. Okay. I was really bothered by the word irreconcilable differences, and I'm just wondering why they have to be that way. Do you have an answer for that, or?
I'm sad that you're bothered by it. So let me. I think you are asking a deeper question. This might, and I'm going to answer it at said deeper level. Potentially, this is just the geek in me that wants to answer this, like deep in the rabbit hole. Let us say, on an earthly level, the Muslim belief that Jesus is God's prophet, and the Christian belief that Jesus is the Son of God and Lord and Savior are irreconcilably different on the earthly level with how finite human minds operate. However, there might well be other levels, right, the infinity of God, so to speak, in which those things are reconciled in ways that the finiteness of our minds cannot fathom. At least the finiteness of my mind, which is probably significantly more finite than your mind, cannot fathom, right? So if you are asking the question, which I think you're asking, are there cosmic levels at which seemingly irreconcilable things are reconciled? I think that is a beautiful question, and my answer to that is possibly. However, on the plane of human existence at which I live, which is the plane of being mediocre and average, there are sets of things in religious doctrine which seem to me irreconcilable, and I think that is okay. In fact, I think that is the deal. But I do not think that those things have to always be the most important things. I'll close with a very simple example, and then I think it would be great if President Holland made a comment on this, because I think this is a very deep question, and we'll give Professor Birch the last words here. So, if an LDS person who observes not drinking alcohol, as I, as a Muslim, observe not drinking alcohol, happen to be in a social situation in which alcohol is flowing, our conversation is probably not going to be on our irreconcilable difference on the nature of prophethood. It's probably going to be on, look at these people, right?
Isn't it interesting? You and I wind up in this corner together again, right? Oh, you like lemon in your sparkling water? I like lime in my sparkling water, right? In other words, there will be other things to talk about which are a part of our religious traditions, which frankly at that time and place are more salient. That doesn't mean they're more important, it just means they're more salient. The woman here spoke of the importance of compassion in every tradition, right? My sense is that the centrality of compassion in the LDS tradition and the centrality of compassion in Islam have many resonances. Those are things that we can talk ad infinitum about, right? And we can appreciate each other around those things. There's going to be an awful lot in common, and that lives alongside, I think, on the earthly, finite level, the irreconcilable difference around the doctrinal issue of prophethood. That at least is my mediocre apprehension of said very deep issue that you brought up.
Well, let me wrap this up with one final wish, that I never have to follow Eboo speaking again for any reason. This has been really a feast, and I thank you for what you've done with our students. There's no way I can add to that extended gloss on that question, except to say this, and maybe to take it into a broader context again of why we're here and what this means, and put it in some historical context, which is, again, some of the field that I operate from. As I said in an earlier event today, 231 years ago, we signed the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War. And that war was about many things, politics and economics and autonomy and a lot of different issues. I don't mean to reduce it in any way, but fundamental to that conflict was in many ways a conflict about religion. It was about these irreconcilable differences, which do exist. And so I accept that beautiful and thoughtful response and explanation of the fact that they do exist. At that time, my view is that part of the reason we fought that war, part of the reason we created a constitution, part of the reason we amended that constitution right out of the chute, so to speak, was to create a sense of separation in our life between our religious life and our civic life. Because at that time, the religious life and the civic were so intertwined, so integral to each other, that these irreconcilable differences were constantly creating conflict and domination in a really unhealthy way in much of the world. And I think some really enlightened people got together and said, we can actually in some ways have greater religiosity, which has been testified to here today, if instead of fusing those things together so closely, we separate them a little bit more. And I think that was the brilliance of our American founding. But there's been a problem since the founding, and that is that initial pull to separate what was once fused so tightly has itself taken on a dynamic, or has for a number of decades, where it's gotten more and more and more separate, more and more compartmentalized, to the point where, as Eboo quoted Paul Simon, that we see these things moving in ultimately different directions. Our civic life, our intellectual life, our university life, these are on kind of one track, and our religious life is over here, and we're sort of embarrassed by it. And the hope I feel today, and what I see happening here at Utah Valley, and certainly the hope for the future, is that without going back to the old days of theocracies and religious domination and control over others, where one world metaphysical and religious view completely dominates that of the other, we go back to something of that original flavor of the founding, which is we have to have some separation. We have to have some space to practice and to believe in our irreconcilable differences, if you will, without them creating roadblocks and obstacles and shackles for our fellow citizens. But in that separatedness, we can't become completely disconnected. There has to be a fusion in our civic life, in our religious life, in our social life, where we are comfortable with each other, talking about those things that do bond us, acknowledging the things that do separate us, and civically finding our way forward to navigate civic success, social success, and a more harmonious environment to pursue the things we all want to individually pursue. I think we can do that, and I think what you've heard today is a rich explanation and defense of ways to do that UVU is committed to doing, and I thank Dr. Eboo Patel for helping us achieve that today. Thank you very much.
Yes, we will. Thank you. For those of you who stayed for the question and answer, I'm sure that you enjoyed it as much as I did. A couple things to mention before we part. One is that Dr. Patel will be signing books right outside of the ballroom for the next few minutes. The second thing is that for those of you who are students, we're going to be moving into a student activity session now called speed faithing, and I don't know if you've heard this term before, but it's a variation of speed dating, which is a rapid fire set of questions given to two people in dialogue with one another in the effort to become acquainted, to deal with difficult questions, and to do so in a way of true encounter between individuals from where they stand. And I think you'll really enjoy this. It's one of the best practices that is taught and advocated by the Interfaith Youth Core. We're trying to put it into practice here at UVU, and we look forward to you either participating or watching the students in action, but it should prove to be very interesting. Finally, tonight at 6:30 p.m., there's a film screening of a documentary called Us and Them, Religious Rivalry in America, and it is a penetrating story of a Latter-day Saint man who interviews some of the most prominent religious leaders in the country about this question of the tensions between competing traditions, and it particularly focuses on the tensions and rivalries that have plagued the Latter-day Saint and the evangelical Christian tradition. And you will see a remarkable journey, a remarkable set of dialogues, and a remarkable message from that film. So if you are game for staying or would like to come back to campus, we would love to have you there. We will gather at the Reflection Center at 6:30. Once again, please join me in thanking President Holland and Dr. Patel today.